Well, you know, it is St. Patrick's Day, and I feel obliged to, as we have our mirth moment, to celebrate with an ethnic joke. But, thank you. To be honest, the way to hell could be paved by ethnic jokes. One has to be very, very careful, very properly careful. But I'm going to tell you an Irish joke. Because one, I have an Irish, we all have the Irish gene, that goes without saying. I have an Irish name. My wife and I had a little home we kept in Ireland for nearly 20 years, way down west, on the ocean. It was beautiful, very lonely, and eventually we relinquished it. Number two, the joke I decided to tell this morning was told me by an Irishman in Ireland. And number four, he happened to be a priest. So I feel, to some extent, absolved in the telling of this joke. It concerns Seamus and Father Patrick. Seamus lives in a little village in the west of Ireland, and his little dog, to whom he is enormously attached, has died. Now, in the dialect of West Cork, that would be a poor wee cratter. Okay, you've got that, a poor wee cratter. That's the little dog. So Seamus is walking up through the village, and Father Patrick is coming down, and Seamus comes up to him and he says, Father, would you be after saying a few words over me poor wee cratter what's died? Father Patrick looks at him and he says, Seamus, you know very well that the church cannot hold any kind of a funeral service for an animal. So Patrick recoils, and so does Seamus. And then Seamus gets to thinking, and he says, but Father, these Baptist folk would have moved in the other side of the village. If I was to be writing them a small cheque for, say, 5,000, do you think they'd say a few words over me poor dead cratter? Father Patrick says, Mary, why didn't you tell me the cratter was a Catholic? That's the best I can do. Thank you. Our co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, laid it down that giving and receiving were sides of the same coin. That the teaching was, in fact, what we would call axiomatic. Giving, receiving, giving and receiving, part of a cycle. And when I first encountered that notion in coming to Unity, I was a little shocked. And I can tell you why in a moment or two. But the first affirmation that I heard was, I am open and receptive to my good. And I said, you can't say that. Surely giving is indisputably more important than receiving. Am I worthy to receive my good? Should I? What about the Bible? What did Jesus say? Well, Jesus told us that as we ask, so shall we receive. He told us it was God's good pleasure to give us the kingdom, the spiritual insight that constitutes our very nature. How are we going to achieve the kingdom if we don't receive it? So how come in the culture in which I was brought up, which was a Christian culture, I was taught that it was infinitely more important that I give for social, moral, religious reasons than that I receive. Receive put me on entirely the wrong level. To receive was socially unacceptable. It implied that there was something I had to give in return, the quid pro quo, as we say in Latin. We do say it in Latin, I do hope so. But the quid pro quo, what was it? What was expected of me? When I was a youngster, a little kid, I remember somebody came to stay with us. A woman whom I can't remember now, but for some reason she found me cute. I suppose I was somewhat, a little forward perhaps, but I was only 10 or 12 years of age, but evidently she found me appealing. And before she left, she gave me some money. And an aunt, one of my aunts, was close at hand. She witnessed the transaction, and she came up to me afterwards. She said, "You shouldn't have done that." She said, "How can you take money?" She said, "You can't do that. We don't do that. People don't do that. We don't take money. You have no right to receive this." I couldn't figure out why. I thought it was a great idea, but she did let me keep it, I recall. But the whole idea was that by receiving, I had demeaned myself in some way. I wasn't worthy of it. I shouldn't have done it. Giving, on the other hand, I remember when I was growing up, was always regarded as important because it did establish the superiority of... Doesn't everybody who gives feel a little bit superior? Oh. Well, yes, we're bestowing gifts, and the recipient is grateful. So giving and receiving don't seem to be part of something axiomatic. They seem to be something of a social transaction. And yet, how did this notion grow up and permeate the society in which we live? Giving much more important and significant than... In fact, receiving can be seen as positively horrifying. Have I become a socialist or something? Am I running around telling people that we're going to give them something for nothing? Oh my God. Well, why did it happen so? Well, I'll tell you why it happened, in part at least. Jesus said all these wonderful things about giving and receiving, but Jesus wasn't the founder of Christianity. Had he been, things might have been a little different. The Apostle Paul certainly was perhaps the founder of early primitive Christianity, but he writes, or is recorded as having said in the book of Acts, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." Right away he imposes a distinction, a qualitative distinction, even quantitative distinction, upon that fundamentally axiomatic notion that giving and receiving are part of the same act. He says, "Oh, no. Giving is more blessed than receiving." Why do you think he said that? Why? He is a very shrewd businessman, the Apostle Paul. Do you think any pastor in his or her right minds would tell a congregation that they could receive with the equal degree of expectation of good? No. I have to tell you, it's far more blessed for you to give. Now, if I wasn't leaving in 2 or 3 weeks, I'd be worried about the security of my job, because I'm telling you this morning that giving and receiving are equally blessed in the eyes of that which made us. But I should be telling you, it's far better that you give. Don't you come around here trying to receive. You are to give. Paul was very shrewd. That's how he founded a church. That's how the church grew. For hundreds and hundreds of years, poverty could be described as a virtue. Look at the mendicant friars, as they were called, of the Middle Ages. But giving was always regarded as superior. There is in one of the Carolinas, I think it's South Carolina, a Christian college. I won't name it. A Christian fundamentalist college. And they have what they call the greatest collection of Christian art in the world. If exaggeration were a sin, I imagine they would have committed it. However, who's to blame them? They want to get people to give money. So, anyway, if you're conned into believing it is the greatest religious collection of religious pictures in the world, to go and see it, and it is worth seeing. Most of the canvases belong to the late Renaissance or to the early Baroque period. The Renaissance, the rebirth, naissance, birth in French, the rebirth of learning, of course, in Europe, maybe in the 14th, 15th centuries even. But they're old canvases. But what impresses one most, or impressed me, when I went from room to room, gallery to gallery, was the inevitable presentation of a giver in a superior position. Undoubtedly, the giver was morally and spiritually superior. The supplicant, or the recipient of the good, was always men, of course. There were always men giving and men receiving. That we don't have to make that point, but they're always there, you know. And I'm on a horse, you know. I'm giving a purse of of gold to my underlings. You know, they grovel and snivel appreciatively. And, of course, my power and authority and control are, as a result, immensely enhanced. Why shouldn't they be? But even in the giving of spiritual gifts, there's always somebody or something up there, sometimes has wings, giving to somebody down here. That's not what Jesus taught, and it's not what unity believes. Giving and receiving, we say, are part of the same fundamental action. As we give, so shall we receive. If you give, expect to receive. Now, if you give out of bad motivation, or if you give in some crooked form or fashion, okay, well, then that's a moral issue, isn't it? But if you give openly of yourself, it doesn't have to be money or goods. We live in a materialist society, so we always think giving has to be money or goods or something. No, we can give of our love, we can give of our understanding, we can give of our compassion, which we should. One of the great tragedies that I've experienced over the years in counseling people is that often in marital relationships, in relationships between people, there is often an inability to accept the love that one has to offer. Sometimes both partners find it difficult to accept love from the other. They're always afraid that there are conditions attached, or that there will be some quid pro quo required, or it's demeaning in some sense. If we learn how to give properly in love and compassion, openly of our gifts, whatever they may happen to be, maybe they are money, those gifts, but also they can be so many, many intangible qualities that make us what we are as human beings. As we reach out and we give, we should expect the return. What's wrong with that? There's nothing immoral or socially improper about that. That's the way the universe works, folks. You give, you receive. I give, I expect my good to return to me. I can't say in what form. It might return in a totally different form, but I have to expect my good to come back. I have to open myself, do I not? There's an old tradition in the East, an old proverb in the East that says, if the flower doesn't open in the morning to receive the dew, it will die. Of course it will die. Of course it will. If we go around like this, if we never open ourselves to receive, if we never expect to receive, why would we receive? We miss out on the benefits of receiving our good. It's complex. It's a difficult thing sometimes to understand. But as we give, so we receive. But so many of us find it difficult to just make that little transition into opening our hearts to receive. I told the story this morning of one of our less popular presidents who lived a long time ago, Andrew Jackson, who pardoned a man whom he believed had been unfairly condemned for a capital crime. And it was probably true, the man was innocent. But the man, for whatever reason, wouldn't accept Andrew Jackson's pardon. He couldn't receive it. He wouldn't receive it. Nobody knows why. But the Supreme Court at the time gave an opinion. It said, no matter how meritorious the case in this instance, this individual would not receive the pardon freely offered. There is no way of coercing the individual to receive what was freely offered. I assume the man was hanged or shot or whatever they did to people in those days, but he wouldn't receive. Therefore, he couldn't take advantage of what was offered. It's amazing how often we limit ourselves for whatever reason in that receiving process. I reminded people earlier today, too, that when I used to raise birds, I was very fond of birds, little birds, parakeets and things, and I used to breed them as a kid. And I was very fond of one little bird, I remember, and I wanted to give it more freedom. Not outside, because I knew it wouldn't survive, but in the aviary. I thought, being confined in this little cage, surely it will want to fly, it will want to receive its freedom. So I opened the door. I left the door open. Bird wouldn't come out. He was so stuck there in the security of that little cage that he wouldn't spread his wings. And I say sometimes to myself and to other people, spread your wings, receive the good that's all around you. Open up, open yourself to these wonderful experiences and opportunities that surround us. Okay, sometimes we feel more secure in giving. As I say, we often get a great bang out of giving, a great feeling of moral superiority. So it's always nicer, isn't it, to bestow than to receive? No. They should be the same action. As you bestow, so you receive. It's part of an amazing dynamic. It's part of the spiritual awakening through which we're passing, all of us together. Doesn't matter what religion we belong to, what denomination we adhere to, that giving and receiving action is of equal validity. And many of the world's great religions teach it. Of course they do. Because it is recognized by the prophets of all times and the great religious adepts and teachers that giving and receiving are just part of the same cycle. So what I say is, I implore you to keep giving, especially to the church. But you can give anywhere you want. But do keep giving. But remember, that opens the way to receiving. Look for the good. Open your hearts. Look for the good. It may not come back in a way that you expect, but it will come. That's the law. As you give, so you receive. When we ask, we receive. When we open ourselves, there is that consequent reciprocal action. That's part of spiritual growth and one of the great teachings of all times. And we dare not neglect it. It's so important. It's so valuable. It is so wonderful to experience that cycle in ourselves. Now I'll stop giving and shut up.